Afternoon all. Let's have a look now at Nimzo's win against Jonah. Well, I think he's had a very good record overall. So we'll take Black's perspective. Nimzovich was Black. So there's a clue there that he won. Okay, so D4. And Nimzo actually played the Dutch defence, believe it or not, F5. Maybe he's sick of everyone playing that dreadedly solid and dull, C3 and E3 against him after Bishop F4. These London system variations, or Bishop G5. Okay, so he spices things up immediately. And White also spices up things further, playing the old Staunton Gambit. So, okay, so Nimzo accepts, and after knight C3 plays knight F6. Now we see Bishop G5. And Nimzo, he experiments now with a novelty move, well, for the time, B6. Okay, he's got the old fianchetto again, the old pressure on E4, which we're coming to expect from a lot of Nimzo games. White plays in Gambit style, playing F3. Nimzo lets White swallow that pawn, E3, which technically engines don't like, but I think it's a very good practical move, because this knight's going to be awkward to develop. Does it actually go to E2 or H3? To develop once White recaptures that pawn. White recaptured it immediately. So now we see E6 and the kind of French defence transposition where Black's trying to get control of D5 and E4, and maybe the pin might be useful in some lines. Queen D2. In fact, here the pin is actually not very useful because it can just be kicked with A3 and White could just play Queen C3, getting that valuable dark square bishop. So forget Bishop B4, but Nimzo plays D5, and now White castles queenside. Now here, instead of another developing move, actually Nimzo decides to put immediately more central tension with move C5. So a typical like French defence move, but as though we've got a fianchetto variation, and without White playing for F4, F5 so quick. Although that might have been a good idea in this game to play F4 and try and clamp down on the E5 square. That's actually an instructive point about this whole game, that it seems White was not able to exploit effectively this weakness on E6. So really, this notion of exploitable weaknesses, which obviously we've seen many examples of great positional play in the past, dynamics, where one side is they're voluntarily giving themselves non-exploitable weaknesses or dissolving the opponent's theoretical weaknesses to make them exploitable. This whole notion of is a weakness is really questioned in this game, because Nimzo balances any potential attacks on E6 with actually a fierce queenside attack in this game, as we're going to see. So Bishop B5, and he writes actually quite instructively, I thought, in his annotations, that one of the aspects, can it be effectively won? That's one thing, or can it be effectively blockaded on E5? So if neither of those cases are present, then is it really, a big deal, basically? So Bishop D7. So White took on D7, Queen D7, and the knight stumbles round with knight H3. Okay, so White might want to still later play F4 and try and clamp down on E5 like that, but Nimzo's got a lot of pressure, you see, on E5. So this is when he talks about the blockading of E5. It never really happened for White. Rook HE1, and now Nimzo castles queenside as well. Okay, and now without the light squared bishop, after Queen E2, Nimzo is not scared actually to play this move, which would normally release the tension in the centre, C4, and it's normally to be avoided, but look where the White king is. So we get a kind of pawn storm like in one of my blitz games. Black's going to just play for B5, B4 and just try and hack the White king. Okay, so White tries to contest this now by finally at least trying to get a lock on E5 and immediate tactical pressure on E6. So Bishop F4. But we've got a knight on the rim here. How is this going to reroute? It can't reroute like this because of that C pawn. Okay, and the F pawn would have been nice to clamp down really on E5 as well. So the bishop's in the way of the F pawn. So there's a few technical aspects in Black's position which mean Black hasn't got too much to worry about. Nimzo does throw in the defensive move now, of course, to protect the pawn, rook E8. So after Queen E3, now H6, depriving White of the g5 square. Maybe g5 and bishop g7 as well will be useful. Okay, so knight e2, and now b5. The pawn storm begins against white's king. Bishop e5. This is not too harmful again. Okay, so we see bishop b4, a nice little move actually, saying if you're not going to get rid of the rook, you're going to have to play c3, and if you play c3, I'm going to have a biting point for b4 later. So it encourages a biting point of white's pawn chain. Nimzo has actually created the undermining points here, c3. So bishop a5, and the bishop can usefully reroute as well. And f4 is actually pointed out as a tactical liability square in many variations, and in some echo variations, which Nimzo talks about, which are not the main variations, but they have the same ideas, some of the same tactical elements as the main variation, and he spots tactical vulnerabilities in the main variation and shows how they're reproduced elsewhere. So bishop f6, gf, and now knight ef4. So, is e6 a weakness? That's the really big question here. Well, this is the first test. Nimzo reacts dynamically. He goes for the king. The counterweight to white's pressure on e6 is white's king position. He plays b4, so starting to logically undermine the pawn chain and expose the white king. The pawn cannot be taken here. I think knight d8 and then bishop f4, and white's losing a piece, because this would all be like too much to bear if bishop c7. Let's have a look now, engine check this position to see, look, is e6 actually a real weakness? So we're going to snap up with knight takes e6. Aha. Okay, knight d8 is given as one of the strong candidate moves, but also bc first. bc, now knight d8, and we see it's starting to get a bit loose now. Now I think the move bishop c7, that's given as a second strongest candidate. But also we have another move which Nimzo, I think he didn't mention, rook h7. So this has the very simple idea of just doubling up rooks, and then white's going to end up losing a piece. So like this. So white's end up losing a piece. Okay. Knight c5, say, and now in this variation, queen d6 hitting that vulnerable knight. So again, this vulnerability of f4 is exposed in multiple variations. So here, finally, white's going to lose a piece after rook takes and rook takes and then queen takes f4. Okay, we've proved that white's losing a piece. He can't really take that pawn. Okay, so what he actually plays after this b4 move, engine off, is actually rook e2. Okay, so black takes on c3 and plays queen d6. So again, there's too many issues to deal with on the queen side here, like queen a3s and stuff. So rook b2 was played, and now we get a vicious attack going. So there's queen a3 attacking c3 immediately, threatening to like win the exchange or a rook. So c3 should be defended. So knight e2, and now Nimzo rips open the centre with this liberating move, which is great in this position because look at white's pieces. This terrible knight on h3, these passive rooks, and this passive knight on e2. So d takes e5 was played, and now technically that actually d4 even works in this position, but Nimzo played an equally effective move, rook takes e5, and just doubling up rooks systematically. So nice, clean, simple positional chess in the centre, what Nimzo likes. So knight hf4, and now we see a beautiful demolition of white's king side, starting with bishop takes c3. So there's not yet any sort of sacrifice even, just bishop takes c3 is there for taking. So knight takes, queen takes check, and now back row pin, rook e1. So rook bd2, and now Nimzo finishes off tactically with rook takes, and now here a very nice quiet little rook move. So with d5 under fire, it would seem, well, maybe white's got something here. There's no invasion point along here, but can you spot a nice killer move which Nimzo must have foreseen several moves ago in this position? If I give you 10 seconds here, what useful attacking move could you play here as black? So 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, Rook e7. Yes, coming in with the kill. Rook b7 check. So rook d2 was played. Now we see queen b4 check. Another precise little move. So keeping an eye on the e1 square in case of rook d2s. So rook b2, now rook e1, supported by that queen. So king c2, now the killer blow check, which I wonder if you can spot if I give you 10 seconds. Starting from now. Okay, queen a4 and white resigns. If king c3, I think there's d4 at least winning the queen, or there might even be a mate in one here, which I can't spot at the moment. Okay, but d4 would seem to be enough here. Let's just check this position, just for technical crush. d4 is actually the strongest move. Okay, so let's have a look in that game and overview and summary. I think it really spelled out this notion of counter-attacking, going for the king. Weaknesses are only exploitable if they're really a big deal and you haven't got a counter-attack going. But if you have, you know, your weaknesses are more theoretical in value, and he really invites white to have that pawn chain so he can bite at it later with b4 and not only get a vicious attack going, ripping open the center. So driven by the center, simple doubling up of rooks, very logical play in its own right, even if the king wasn't a target. And now just tearing the king to pieces with a few checks, a killer checks. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? I think the exploitable weakness notion is the key notion in this game. Thanks very much.